হ্যালো, আচ্ছা একই জিনিস তো, ওটা একই জিনিস তো, ঠিক আছে, আমার লেখা আছে, আমার কাছে লেখা আছে। না আচ্ছা, না তো
Am I visible?
Yes, Amin, you are audible. Yeah.
Okay. So, Bapin, we are starting. Splendid good afternoon to everyone. As you all know, the Department of English, in collaboration with IQAC, Amdanga, Mahavidyalaya, had organized the student webinar on reading and recontextualizing literary text in times of pandemic on 13th and 14th of this month. Sorry for the interruption. I would request all the participants in this meeting to please switch off your microphone and the video, please. Okay, thank you. So, as you all know, the Department of English, in collaboration with IQAC, Mahavidyalaya, had organized an international seminar on reading and recontextualizing literary text in times of pandemic on 13th and 14th of this month. On the first day, keynote was addressed by Professor Dept, Vice Chancellor, Bankura University. We had with us Professor Chakraborty, Professor and HOD, Department of English, West Bengal State University in chair, and very distinguished and noted speakers like Dr. Arno Bray, Associate Professor of the University College and others. On the second day of the webinar, we faced a critical technical glitch and could not run the program beyond a single speaker, and we had to call it a day. Today we have a special lecture by Dr. Subhadeep Paul, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bankura University, West Bengal. This special lecture is basically a continuation of the webinar held on 13th and 14th of this month. I take the privilege to welcome Dr. Subhadeep Paul on behalf of the department and Amdanga Mahavidyalaya. I also seize this minute to apologize to Dr. Paul and all our participants on the day for the technical problem for which we could not connect Dr. Paul for his speech, which is presumably very erudite and entertaining. Now I would also like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to Dr. Mitali Gangopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of English and Coordinator IQAC, Mrinalini Datta Mahavidyalaya, for her gracious presence among us today. She had chaired the session on the second day of the webinar, and she would also chair it today. Thank you, ma'am, for your august and kind presence. Now, I would like to hand over the forum to Dr. Mitali Gangopadhyay. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shamim, and a very good afternoon to all of you here. I think we were all a bit disappointed last week when we couldn't really hear Dr. Subhadeep Paul because of technical glitches. So we are really happy that he's back with us today. And so we have the continuation of the second day of the webinar. Uh, I will just like to introduce Dr. Subhadeep Paul to you. He is currently assistant professor in English at Bankura University School of Literature and Language and Cultural Studies, West Bengal. Formerly, he held a substantive post at Maulana Azad College and served as a guest lecturer at Lady Brabourne College in the PG wing of the Department of English, Kolkata. He was a UGC Research Fellow at Jadavpur University. His MPhil was on a re-evaluation of South Asian diasporic sensibility in Indian expatriate literature, and his PhD was a critic of East-West cultural polarizations in Indian English fiction. He has co-edited a book entitled Anxieties, Influences and After, a collection of critical essays on post-colonialism and neo-colonialism. This has been published by Worldview Publishers in association with Wimbledon Press, UK, in the year 2009. He was co-director of a 2-year major research project, 2016 to 2018, and entitled Discoursing the Homeless Elderly, Tropes, Desires, Contentment. This project was funded by the ICSSR in collaboration with the University of Swansea, UK. His fictional and non-fictional writings have featured in Blue Minaret Literary Journal, Ardent Lamp Journal, the Four Quarters magazine, Northeast Review, the Sunday Statesman, the Telegraph, and the Luan Press, Edinburgh. Finite Sketches, Infinite Reaches, 2009, was his first book of poems from Writers' Workshop, Kolkata, which received a Google Scholar citation by Professor Shamala A. Narayan in the Journal of Commonwealth Literature by SAGE. So it's a pleasure to have Dr. Subhadeep Paul with us today. And his paper is entitled, his talk on the novel and the new normal, critical interrogation. So welcome, Dr. Subhadeep Paul, and over to you.
Thank you, Mitali, ma'am. I hope I am audible, more or less. There are some hitches still.
No, you are. You are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, ma'am. So at the very outset, let me thank Amdanga, Jugal, Kishore, Mahavidyalaya for inviting me over as a resource person to deliver an e-lecture for this wonderful webinar entitled Rereading and Recontextualizing Literary Texts in Times of Pandemic. Now, let me very briefly express my gratitude primarily to Professor Shamim Reza, a wonderful human being, Professor Sudipto Roy, Professor Chirantan Dasgupta, and most certainly the chief patron, the honorable principal of the college, Dr. Anandi Mohan Roy. In particular, I thank the chairperson, Dr. Mitali Gangopadhyay, doubly because I also felt bad when, due to the technical hitches, we couldn't connect the previous day, and she had a lot of patience in bearing through this ordeal. And with her kind person and permission, I begin my lecture. Now, before we go into the core dynamic of fiction creation and fiction consumption, though I'll be speaking primarily on the genre of the novel, let us have a look at the situation, the current situation, which is from a publisher's point of view. The new publishing standard holds that COVID-19 has literally coerced a serious rethink of the maneuverability of the publishing industry. I'm beginning with the publishing industry, the status of the publishing industry at this moment. because all of you would agree with me that the present pandemic has made the business of book consumption and the creation of the book. By the book, I not only mean the codex version of the book, but I mean book in all its forms, the mini form, the e-form, and many other forms of, the picture book form, and many other forms of the way the book comes out in the market. Now, this has forced a sudden cancellation of physical live events. Some very prominent events like Romania's Bucharest Book Fest and Moldova's Chisinau event. And at more micro levels, libraries have halted the purchase of what I would say the spined codex versioned books and switching to ebooks gradually. So this embracing of the digital capacity and offerings flexible pricing is currently aimed to maintain a high consumer demand. Critics feel, of course, that the global publishing industry will never return to its pre-pandemic situation. This is not to suggest any annihilation of the events for print status, but the fact remains that many of us are now what I would term as hybrid readers. This is a term I'm culling in my lecture because this is a very pertinent term now, that we are both now print-based stakeholders and we are also transitioning to digital domains. However, what impact does this have for small, mid-level, and even big publishing houses for a long-term practiced digital distancing to prevent Amazon's hand from becoming strong? Now, this is to say that I'm not embarking on any anti-business statement, but the fact remains that when you have these mega corporations consuming the book market at a very rapid rate, the status and the future of the small publishers become dubious. And small publishers cannot always offer ebooks very easily and very randomly every time. Sometimes they choose not to do so also. So will these small publishers be wiped out of the market? Some regional and national level publishing houses don't want to, really set up a competition with the big publishing houses. And moreover, they're very much conscious of their restricted geo-territorial markets. So in one of my previous lectures, I had talked about the way, the outbreak narrative was being conditioned and reconditioned in different permutations and combinations, and how, forums like Netflix and Amazon Prime, they were taking over the big screen experience. And noted writer Amitav Ghosh, while speaking to an Italian newspaper, Live Mint, he spoke on the difference between climate change narratives. Many of you designate this as the cli-fi, group of fictional works, and the pandemic-themed fiction. So this is a difference that I think we must keep in mind as avid book readers, that we have had a plethora of works that were published based on the climate change events or episodes that were taking place for a very long time. And most of these, works, the fictional works that have come out, they were predicated in the future. They were part of what we know as speculative fiction. But at the same time, I would say that as far as books are concerned, it isn't that we would have very immediately, or as far as, stating the whole thing based on today's date, a very wide variety of books available on the pandemic, the present pandemic. Though I'm sure that very soon in the coming few months, you will be having a lot of books on this particular theme. But this is not to say that we have not had very interesting books on different kinds of, epidemic experiences and quasi-pandemic situations in the past as well. So the Western world, predicated on capitalist expansion and materialist surfeit, has postulated the idea of climate change in terms of a futurity, whereas epidemics have had traditionally a topical literary treatment. So Amitav Ghosh succinctly gives the example of the fact that fictional narratives on Hurricane Sandy, which took place in New York in 2012, and Hurricane Harvey, which took place in Houston in 2017, were practically nil. Okay, but epidemics and their what I would term as the big brother of the epidemics, the pandemic, they have had very scanty treatment as far as the whole idea of fictional generation of the fact is concerned. Now, based on this, my assumption would be that we would have to have a proper rethink about how we are going to receive certain traditional works of novel writing or novels that have taken place in the past based on our current situation. Let me give you an example. We have had traditionally works like Boccaccio's Decameron or Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. The second example is, of course, not a novel, but still we have had works like Manzoni's The Betrothed. So these works were potentially there in the past as well, in parts of very experimental syllabi of universities that have always tried to keep pace with the changing requirements of the syllabi. So universities and departments that have traditionally always upgraded their syllabi have included these works in different subsections. So we have had literature and sport, we have had literature and sexuality, we have had literature and let's say posthumanism or futurism. So we might even have a new categorization of a subliterary genre called literature and the pandemic, and I'm sure this will be introduced in many different departments very soon. But the question remains as to how do we negotiate with these old works or comparatively older works in the present day context? Do we need to rethink or restudy the modalities in which we were previously habituated to reading these works? Pandemic literature, in particular, the hugely popular genre of the novel, will be interiorized by the reading public just as post 9/11 fiction became a veritable reality. Many of you who are enthusiasts of American fiction, like me, you would know that when you visit any particular American library or a library that stocks American literature or non-literary fiction as well, non-fiction as well, you would find separate sections dedicated to post 9/11 fiction. Now, when 9/11 actually took place, the first works that I encountered in libraries like the American Center in Kolkata, the USIS library, were non-fictional works on 9/11, or works that were dealing with socio-cultural evaluation of the same. But very soon we found out that there were a lot of works that have come out on 9/11 fiction, and a lot of works that served as warning to the fact that something apocalyptic on a political plane like 9/11 could take place. I was very surprised to find that Salman Rushdie's Fury, one of his very lesser known novels, had predicated on this kind of a fear quite a long time before the thing actually took place, the collapse of the Twin Towers and everything. But that's a different area. I'm not venturing into that. My intention of pointing this out to you is to try to evaluate rather, whether this will be a passing fad or this will remain as a debatable entity for a very long period of time. It might be that pandemic-based ideas in fictive creation or factual analysis would remain part of our historical discussion in the very near future, provided we can survive this ordeal. And I'm hopeful that we do. Though we are also equally regretful of the fact that a lot of lives have been lost because of this unfortunate pandemic. Now, the question is this, that if fiction writing and consumption as processes have undergone a massive overhaul, will the subject and the theme of the engagement with the very idea of the new normal novel also undergo a similar transformation? This is to be now questioned and debated as to whether the new normal is going to stay for a long period of time or perhaps forever. I don't have faith in the fact that it's going to be there forever in our hearts and minds as a fear psychosis, because a lot of us have thrown caution to the winds as far as the new normal is concerned. But I'm sure this would have an indelible imprint on our minds, that we would definitely consider this as part of our lives, that the new normal has become a veritable reality. And along with that, perhaps the new normal novel would be here to stay, parallel to the old world ideas that were there. So yes, for instance, if I, to pass my time, watch, let's say, clippings of an old Jean-Claude Van Damme's movie on Cyborg, or just for the thrill of the adrenaline rush, watch a movie like Fast and Furious, even in the context of today, it would be a sort of reconnect to an old past, which is now precarious in this present context. But this is not to say that that context can be returned very easily at this very moment, because we are sure that the imprint of the new normal is going to last for a very long time, and there has been and there will be a continuation in novelistic terms on the different kinds of experimentations that will be done and that are continuously being done on the idea of the new normal. So the new normal is not going to die out very soon, very easily. And along with this, there will be many different kinds of erosion of certitude and the confidence of stabilities on which Occidental rational superiority, the Enlightenment ethics, and Western material progress will be founded. Now, Ghosh talks about the politics of attrition, as many of you know who have listened to him in the very recent present. And he points out that seeping into the domain of the novel, the most topical subject matter, and simultaneously this is also getting complemented by non-fictional writers as well, who are motivated by the same impulse. So this is to point out to you the fact that when you read novels like Gun Island, of course, many of us have read it very avidly, and we have understood that it has served as a due warning to the fact that the time is ticking for all of us, and issues like global warming, climate change, sudden outbreaks of epidemics, and sometimes due to globalized forces, them turning into pandemics, and the crisis of migration that is taking place now. All these issues are interrelated issues. In literature and in departments, departments are always interdisciplinary. They maintain their boundaries because of job reasons, I'm pretty much sure. It's very seldom that you find a transdisciplinary initiative taking place, but then times are changing. But along with that, let me also point out to you that novels like Gun Island would also have as a complementary addition to them works which are not fictional, directly fictional, like The Great Derangement, and sometimes even written by the same author. So it goes to show that you will have a lot of scientific research going into this. And this is where I would like to point out to you that when I am talking about the new normal novel and when I am critically interrogating the same, I find a lot of goosebumps, as I was talking to Samim the other day, that as researchers, when we delve into these works which were written in the past, maybe at that point of time, they did not get that much of critical attention or they were deliberately sidelined. We find that they are being increasingly reread in the context of the present, and newer light is being cast on a critical understanding on the way they were conceptualized. I remember one of my colleagues and enthusiasts of eco-criticism or eco-critical theoretical concerns. He asked me in one of my previous lecture forums as to why Mary Shelley's The Last Man was not so popular or is not so popular as Frankenstein. You know, people went gaga over Frankenstein, but very few people would actually even know about The Last Man. It's a latter day work. I'll come to that in the latter part of my lecture. But then the reasons are very obvious. You know, people did not want to listen to apocalyptic truths. You know, even today, people don't. There's a considerable section of the world populace who do not want to listen to people like Greta Thunberg or allied eco warriors like her, who are maybe not so famous or who are not from the West, but who are equally fighting in their own local capacities, maybe not with so much of media fanfare. So this becomes obligatory on our part to understand that people who have their eyes set, and usually right-wing ideologies which have their eyes set on only material exploitation of resources, material considerations of profit-making, of wealth creation, they would not want to listen to anything long-term. You know, it's the same idea as we have that why does a 300 crore rupee project bridge collapse within 2 months after its inauguration by a chief minister? The reasons are very much the same. Public memory is short. People will forget that a bridge was made with that kind of money, and very soon a new tender would come. So as conscious citizens, we must try to come out of this dead end, and we must try to do something about it. Okay. Now, once again, let me remind you that this is not to say that the new normal novel is compulsively didactic in spirit. I'm not trying to tell you that the new normal novel, whoever is writing it and whoever is introducing whatever bits of themes that they find relevant in the context of their narratives, that they are deliberately trying to sound preachy. No, absolutely not. But what I'm trying to tell you is the fact that there has always been an element of spicing up the new normal idea or the ideas that came before that, which were apocalyptic in nature, as something to do with fancifulness or something to do with speculative fiction, something to do with fantasy literature, as something which is very highly removed from tangible, immediate mimetic reality. That is something I terribly disagree with. And I would try to point out to you literary works that have come out majorly from the West, very ironically, but have also come out from the non-West as well. Because this is a binary that no matter how much we try, we can never get over with due to very obvious, tangible reasons. That the pandemic novel is not simply lockdown literature that we can, consume for time pass, or that is something that we all agree upon, and then we get back to the old normal of, deliberate repetitions of the same callousness towards nature or to our own lives, our lives and the lives of the non-human species around us. I mentioned in my previous lecture as well that perhaps this is one of the first times when humans have been transmitting this virus to non-humans as well. Many of you know that there are cases where zookeepers have transmitted the virus to the caged animals there. The tigers and other forms of carnivores have caught this virus from their keepers. So this is not to say, and even pets are vulnerable. So this is not to say that we can afford to be very preachy, because till today, when we have reached almost the third stage of experimentation for a vaccine, for a very viable vaccine for all of us, we still do not know 100% about the virus. I'm appalled to find out that 95 to 99% of the masks that are there, both offline and online in India, are not original masks. So, and they are circulating. So yeah, we can get rid of China, but we cannot get rid of the Chinese syndrome, as I call it. So we must be more, I think, macrocosmic in our evaluation when we are trying to deal with fiction. Based on this, let me also point out to you the fact that lockdown literature has not only been something in the visual medium, but it has also been something in the print medium. A lot of us are reading books on the new normal idea, and I'm sure they won't slacken very soon. So most of these works, they are predicated on a fear psychosis, contamination phobia, which when slackened from public memory would mean that we all become intended coronials, physically and psychologically. So what is changing with the issue of novel writing is also proportionate to what is changing and has changed with the world at large. Amitav Ghosh, coming back to him once again, being one of my most favorite writers at present, repeatedly refers to the great acceleration. This is a term that he used in many different forums. This is operating in alignment with the great derangement also. So what is the great acceleration to which I think pandemic literature is also a part of? Since the 1990s, now let me give you a very brief historical prelude to my lecture, which is this: that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the very idea of globalization became, heightened since the 1990s in particular. And this follows the Washington Consensus, and the very dynamic of neocolonialism was also enhanced thereby. We enter the neo-imperial age. Many of you who had read my book, which I had co-edited with two other wonderful authors on anxieties, influences, and after, would recall that I had worked on the neo-colonial chapter, which is the continuation of post-colonialism and colonialism in the wake of the neo-globalized empire, the American empire that is there. So that is markedly different in spirit from the old colonial phase. And Ghosh calls it the calculus of global power, quote unquote, which was led by the American empire and majorly governed by mercenary summits like the G8. So this has been basically a Western plan of non-physical expansionist designs. Now, this led to a major inflation in the extraction, transportation, and consumption of fossil fuels. Renewable energy hasn't been prioritized, and the oil of the Middle East, its circulation has also been monitored and manipulated. So unpredictable and rampant migration of people has taken place. Reshufflement of goods, climate change, and epidemics and pandemics were also part of the interrelated phenomena in due course of time. Now, we do not know why. I had a lot of talk about this in the past, so I'm not trying to sound repetitive. I'll go about the whole thing in a nutshell. Is that why the Wuhan labs were originally employed by many different powers as a testing center, and how come the coronavirus reached such diabolical proportions? If it was at all, human science or the scientific come technological imperative for human progress, if it was for the betterment of humanity, why was there so much of secrecy about the whole thing? Why was so much of data wiped out? Why is there very much of undercover, collaborations between different powerful nations? Now, we will not know about this multinational alignments very openly, though we might have some bit of idea about it discreetly. But the ground for a biomilitary intimidation remains, and we are not sure how this Frankensteinian pandemic took shape as COVID-19. But I was very surprised to find out that the pandemic had actually taken place way back sometime in 2017. So mid-17 till 18, 19. Almost the end of 19, near the Christmas of 2019, there was this whole attitude of censorship towards the virus and its outbreak. So it was not a pandemic, definitely from the very outset. And this has not missed the creative eye of writers, and this has not missed the critical eye of non-fictional writers as well. So this collective crisis was treated as non-propagandist, though a lot of propaganda was also associated with it. And it is an irony that the rise of the novel, which took place in the West, should be the very same place where techno-scientific issues should be very grossly overlooked. Now, Ghosh is against the term cli-fi or cli-sci-fi, because the clock for the position is ticking. I keep on repeating this to you over and over again so that we all become pragmatically conscious about the idea. And at the same time, a hyperventilation of the same in terms of global funding against any forms of health atrocity is still very negligible. So while we have in the humanities a sudden rush for medical humanities and understanding of medical humanities in its many different constituencies, we still do not have enough funding for the research modalities of the pandemic or similar pandemics which have which might be taking shape in the near future. Hopefully not. But then we have ignored SARS, MERS, and other so to say, almost quasi-global epidemics that have taken place. So based on this, I definitely have to use Zygmunt Bauman's idea of the pandemic being locally contingent. It's not just globalization at work, it's localization at work. And that is the reason why India had emerged from the 14th or the 17th position to the 3rd position. Because time-tested ideas of racial, cultural, political, governmental, democratic, and ideological superiority of Western states have now proved hollow. The position of Trump, Boris Johnson, Macron, and Bolsonaro have proved extremely hollow. Some of them have directly been affected by the virus itself, which is an irony to contend with. And I'm very happy that President Trump is now wearing a mask. But at the same time, let us understand that the very psychosociality that drives this mentality of hegemonic masculinity, theological justifications of the same, the albino bio-superiority complex, the militaristic adamancy of showcasing the Occident and the Western body politic as invulnerable. These ideas were terribly shaken to the core by this pandemic literature that we have coming up at an increasing gusto. Fake news and statistical denial and resorting to new age superstitious cards is the present buzzword of self-ventilation. But at the same time, COVID-19 is not to be reductively read as an oriental misdemeanor. It has long been done like this, that this has been called the Wuhan virus, the Chinese virus, as a kind of Oriental fallacy. So this is, even when we talk about the pandemic, it is a continuation of Orientalism, and of course the flip side of Occidentalism that we talk about later. The mannerisms of South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, they have not had media highlight, though they have been enormous success stories of the pandemic. And not all white nations, suggestively speaking, have supremacist designs either. I'm not suggesting that either, because one very potential example of this is New Zealand, which is led by its very wonderful Lady Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, which is a very vivid example of the fact that it's not race at the end of the day that we need to address primarily, but the disease itself and the unease surrounding the disease, and the way to negotiate an understanding between the old normal and the new normal. So let me now come to some of the works that you have been long waiting for. So Chris Bourjalien, the author of the novel The Red Lotus, observes that writing a novel during the pandemic necessarily does not translate into the fact that it has to be based on a pandemic itself, or it has to be based on a particular epidemic itself. He refers to the Armenian novelist Zabel Yosayan's observation on the fluctuating tides of history. Now, what does Yosayan say? He says that we are very aware that we are in the middle of a war, but we are still continuing our calm and monotonous life. So you see, pandemic literature has also been part of this idea that maybe outside there are apocalyptic things which are happening, that there is a comet which is about to strike, or my next door neighbor is getting viral infected, but I am still having to lay butter on my bread, and I'm still having to talk with my child, and I'm still having to pat my pet dog. So many of the continuities of the old life are still going on, and that's what concerns these novels as well. So there is a kind of critical balancing between, our routine works and maybe some of the things for which we have not been given any time to prepare for. The pandemic has not given us time to prepare for. We are having to do things in a jiffy. So the new normal novel will counterbalance humdrum activities like preparing dishes, or posting feed and snaps in Twitter and Instagram. Many of you are doing that, along with graver concerns like self-isolation, medical helplessness, intrafamilial complexities, online working, webinars, and e-client meetings. It might also be that many of these works, with so much of online traffic now going on, the apocalypse might not really come in the form of monster comets and more villainous viruses that will affect us. But what I dread the most, a sort of internet jam, because of so much of data rushing in cyberspace at this moment. So it is true that when Shakespeare wrote King Lear during a London plague, quarantine, he was in quarantine, he did not really theme it on the plague itself. Most of you would know that King Lear is not directly about any plague, maybe even not very remotely indirectly also. But what I found out is that it does contain ideas of accommodation and exposure that are very vividly enacted in King Lear. And we have this, operating right now, that how many of us are safely accommodated in our houses, how many of us get safe accommodation in nursing homes and hospitals, and how many of us are cast open, how many of us are migrant workers, how many of us couldn't return home. So just as Lear was the most ensured man in his kingdom, and from there he happened to be the unaccommodated man. He happened to lose the hovel in a terrible storm, and he branched out. So these ideas would serve as haunting reminders of the fact that the plague is not just about the plague. the physical part of the plague or the physical part of any epidemic, but it is also about the psychological repercussions that we have to deal with on a daily basis. In fact, Fang's Wuhan Diary, this is a very interesting non-fictional work that I have to refer to. I have to refer to two non-fictional works to make my idea of the new normal novel clear. And one of this is Wuhan Diary, Dispatches from a Quarantine City. And the other work that I will talk about is Deborah McKenzie's COVID-19, the pandemic that never should have happened. And at the same time, the pandemic also concerns with the idea in its subtitle, how to stop the next one. You know, it's the subtitle is more interesting than the main title, that it's not just a pandemic that should not have happened, but we have to prepare, we have to make ground for the fact that we must be ready by now or very soon in the recent future to stop the next one. If not now, then when? So this is also part of the new normal novel's engagement. It's not a part of fear annihilation, or it's not a part of quenching your fear, psychosis, or your associated fears that are there, but it's a part of heightening that fear, you know, because I keep on telling this, that it's good to have some bit of fear. It's good to have an idea about the fact that there are checks and balances. It's good to be aware of the fact that the Superman or the Supermen, the superheroes, and of course the messiahs are not going to come and save us this time. Okay, and this is why, since I mentioned in one of my previous lectures that we have a comical deflation of the superhero in many movies. Many of you have watched a recent Batman movie where, you know, Batman was a comical undertone. You know, he was not really the promise all superhero for all of us. So these things have to be part of our new normal, that we are all, part of the game. And as a 90s comic strip hero pointed out, a superhero pointed out, Captain Planet, that the power is with us. You know, the power, by that power, I mean the responsibility is with us. Power entails responsibility. And unless it is responsible, it is no power at all. So these are not to say, this is not to say these are not works that are understanding based on the fact that the evolution of the post-pandemic novel was automatic, was sudden. Because this online diary that Fan Fang was writing, it began since January 25th, 2020. And Wang pointed out the fact that this has suffered a terrible suppression by Chinese authorities. The government introduced a lockdown in Wuhan for a very long period of time, but did not inform the rest of the world as to how things were going to take shape based on a proximity understanding of the fact that the dangers of the virus were so severe. I was supposed to go to Thailand sometime at the middle of this year, and the organizers there in the conference there, they kept on asking me when my visa would be ready. And I said that I will tell you later, because I don't want to get stranded in Thailand for the rest of my life. And eventually that event was postponed. But down the line, I came to know that after China, Thailand was the next country that actually made this virus a pandemic. Okay. From China, it went to Thailand, and from Thailand, it gradually started spreading to other parts of the world. And by now, it's an international event, nothing really to celebrate with conches or utensils, but at the same time, something to be deliberately to be afraid of, something to deal with a rational temper, and also with an empathetic understanding. In fact, the pandemic has boosted sales of books like Stephen King's The Stand, Margaret Atwood's The Year of the Flood, and Ling Ma's Severance. This is a novel that I will be speaking of in length because this is a very vital novel when it comes to pre-pandemic and post-pandemic understanding, and especially a topical understanding of how things have always meant for us, but we have given it the slip. Now, in the media, in social media and in print media and in television, you have found out that D. Koon's, the novel The Eye of Darkness, had got a lot of media highlight for talking about the term Wuhan and mentioning with the fact that there is a lot of experimentation going on in China or the Orient, the Dragon Country, the unknown Orient, the mysterious Orient, and all that. But at the same time, Namita Gokhale, the author of the novel Paro and the founder director of the JLF, the Jaipur Literary Fest, she describes the pandemic as a hiccup in history for which futurist technologies will speed up to attend to the compulsions of a new isolationist reality. This is how she describes it, that the compulsions of a new isolationist reality will have to be tendered with. So it's not a big deal if you have to befriend your Kindle reader or download novels from, EPUB or many other forums. But at the same time, I have found out that notable bookstores and publishing houses like Seagull have offered free novels for their consumers, for their readership, for the steady readership, to live through these trying times. And they have given us PDF downloadable copies to grapple with this very open time that we have. Now, the assortment of novels that Seagull had given us is also wonderful to look at. Some of the novels that I found very interesting and relevant to my lecture are Lola Lafon's We Are the Birds of the Coming Storm, Toby Litt's Mutants, Wes Bonofoy's Together Still, and Shakti Chattopadhyay's translated work, Very Close to Pleasure. These are the 4 works that I would recommend to you as, part of pandemic lit understanding in many different permutations and combinations. And please inform me how it has influenced you in whatever ways it has or it will. The novel today, in the dynamic manifestations of the ongoing debate on the new normal, is part of a quasi-primeval tradition of engraved and enframed human narrativization of stories that blend fact and fictive threads. So yes, the new normal novel is also part of that very traditional process of negotiating fact with fiction. Fiction is not fabrication of fact, though yes, there is a very strong category of speculative fiction which is very, very fanciful in nature. But fantasy fiction is not fanciful fiction. This would be a misnomer, and we have to be alert to this, changing dynamic of the novel. So the epic, its precursor, the novel's precursor, had been codified in numerous forms during major epidemics and other cataclysmic times. Gilgamesh was inscribed on baked clay tablets. The Mahabharata was a fact of orality for a very long period of time. Gezar Ling transcribed on palm leaf manuscripts, ink rubbings, and woodblock printings of East Asia are very prominent examples in this regard. Now, dangerous zoonotic diseases crossing into humans and the do's and don'ts to snap the chain of transmission require a more searing examination of a rapidly altering biosphere that has been continuously accessed with anthropocentric priorities. This is the mistake that we have done, that we have understood this biocentric sphere that we live in with anthropocentric intentions and anthropocentric approaches. Now, in this context, Ling Ma's severance, chronicling the pandemic eliminationist absolutism of Shen fever. Shen fever is the ailment which is discussed in this novel that makes human life very vulnerable, and humans turn into zombies in the sense that they repeat old routines like becoming automatons. The bleak, fatalistic mood of the 2018 period is captured in this satirical sci-fi thriller. It is hailed as the novel of the coronavirus era because it deconstructs the humans of late capitalism as posting their and positing their normalcy on dead habit. This is another problem that happens, is this, that Severance is a novel that has pointed out to us that we do not get enlightened. For all the information that we get, for all the ravages of the past that has already taken place, we become creatures of dead habit. And we have this habitual tendency of returning to the old normal. So it is the original prelude of the new normal novel, as I would call it. Peter Heller's The Dog Stars is set 10 years after a flu decimates half the American population. Like a bird flu necessitates culling of diseased chicken, epidemics and pandemics cull human population as it is happening now. Colson Whitehead's Zone 1, this novel questions who the real zombies are, the brain-sick us or the plague-infected skeletons. In fact, along with the physical reorganization of our lives, a psycho-emotive re-evaluation is also called for, which is what Margaret in her very successful novel, The Year of the Flood. Simultaneously, there are many other novels that I wouldn't have time to really go at length, but I would definitely want to point out. Novels like They Came Like Swallows show that speculative fiction isn't necessary to give goosebumps alone. A mere influenza outbreak decimates the human population into half. There are novels like Michael Critton's The Andromeda Strain, where the microorganisms are projected as aliens and killers alike. So Critton is giving you one of the best examples of the E.T. Slayer that you would find. Many other novels are there in this category. Stephen King's The Stand that I talked about, that I just now mentioned. Stephen King always delights in taking nightmarish stands. But there is a virus here, Captain Trips, who takes down everybody. So the cover of this novel would show you that there are humans who are just lying down dead. And interestingly, the title of the novel is The Stand. So we haven't taken a stand, and we are all, none of us are standing up. We have all fallen down. Nicola Griffith's Ammonite, who is which is based on a first-hand commentary on COVID-19 from King County, Washington, comments on questions of gender and society using a futuristic epidemic as a trope. Rolf Reimann is the author of The Child Garden. This novel was written in 1989. He opined that in a futuristic society, cancer has been cured, but viruses are being used as tools to educate humans. Now, this is an interesting take, that the virus is no longer just a malevolent force, but it is now being treated as a benevolent agency. Unfortunately, I think almost 15, 20 years have passed since this novel, and we found that cancer is still life-threatening. It has not been cured in its total scope, and viruses are still outsmarting humans in 2020. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Times of Cholera has shown us that plagues are imponderable dangers that surprise us because they have what Marquez calls the quality of destiny. And Marquez himself was influenced by, as he admitted, by Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year. where the agonizing cries of the poor in their homes is recorded with a very sharp vivacity. One must not also forget traditional works like Albert Camus' The Plague, that records the 1849 cholera epidemic in Algeria. This was written sometime around 1947. But then we know the plague today. We study the plague today primarily as being most important for showing us the horrors of fascism. Many of us forget the primacy of the title itself, the plague that had a very decisive imprint on Camus' mind. So in conclusion, therefore, we need to acknowledge the fact that novels directly or indirectly offer commentary on the post-COVID new normal, the pandemic ennui that is currently the state of the order of things, and the impossible ways of coming out of it. But then that has to be made possible also. We acknowledge the anthropocentric overreaching in many different ways. Margaret Atwood has warned us of the unforeseen consequences of genetic engineering in the novel Orange and Craig. This novel is a 2003 novel. Now, why do I mention this novel? Because COVID-19 does not directly have to do with genetic engineering, but I'm not sure whether it does not have anything to do with genetic manipulation or genetic reordering or genetic deselection and reselection. So, of course, we have to understand that we have to be doubly sure before we are taking Frankensteinian leaps into the future, and before things get out of hand and things have catastrophic conclusions for all of us. The Washington consensus with which I began my lecture and the subsequent aftermath has not been a responsible period at all. Let me just very, very succinctly point this out to you, that when Harth and Negri, they talk about the fact that the age of empires is not to go away very soon, and the American empire is now in its full peak. We do not even know whether the Chinese empire is going to come up. What is going to be the case with the balance of powers of this world in the future? But we have to be very careful. And part of the strategy of the new normal novel is to make us conscious of these dangers that lie ahead for us. And I would also like to point out to you the fact that there is a novel called The Years of Rice and Salt, 2002, by Stanley Robinson, who pointed out that a mutation of the bubonic plague had taken place. And this mutation had infected almost the entirety of the human population, and it had almost depopulated Europe completely. Imagine Europe is depopulated, and this will inevitably reshift the balance of powers of this world on a permanent basis. I don't know about Europe getting depopulated completely. Thankfully, the pandemic has not been that severe as yet, but we do not know about the consequences, the far-reaching consequences of the incremental status of this pandemic, how it is going to land us up in the near and the distant future, how much of population debunking is going to take place in the very recent future. So we have to be hopeful, but we mustn't be over enthusiastic about the fact that things would be taking a better turn very soon. As long as it doesn't, we have to be very careful. At a more personal level, Otessa Morfeg's Death in Her Hands explores the dark consequences, the dark side of social distancing. Now, social distancing is a very positive term that has been promoted in the media, which when operated properly would help us survive the pandemic better. But in this novel, a lonely old widow tries to solve a murder mystery in isolation. because she is in isolation, and so she decides to turn sleuth for a little while. She decides to be a self-chosen detective for a time being. So speaking of isolation is dread, one cannot forget the novel that I had pointed out to you I'd be discussing in the later part of my lecture, Mary Shelley's apocalypse novel, the 1826 novel, The Last Man. I hope, and till now I believe that this is the novel that began the apocalypse novel genre. I think Mary Shelley is the precedent of this of this genre, the apocalypse novel, and she had predicated this novel in 2100. Okay, this is the timeline. 2100 England, and it features as its protagonist a character called Lionel Verney. Lionel Verney is the male version of Mary herself. Okay, and he is the last man. He is the last man left surviving to tell the story and to do something about it. Mary Shelley had pointed out the failures of Godwinianism, the way her father had positive hopes about the future. Wollstonecraftianism, she also deflated a lot of ideas of her own mother, and the Burkean response to the French Revolution. So most of the utopianism associated with the French Revolution was deflated at this point of time. At a personal level, she had lost her husband, so this was also a point of time when she was trying to come to terms with the state of affairs of this world. But this was a novel which was shunned completely. This was a novel that was shelved completely. And quite obviously, given the status of the fact that Mary Shelley was a schizophrenic, and of course, given the fact that mental health was not perhaps taken seriously in those days to the extent that it is now, it still has a long way to go. She was branded as insane. She was branded as this was a lunatic's futurist projection. This was a lunatic's fictive malady that was taking place. This is the way how the last man was treated. And we shouldn't do that, but the Western world has done it on Shelley's own part. But what I find very interesting is the fact that Mary Shelley has pointed out in this novel that medicine has not proved to be a succor, an immediate succor. Though medicine, the quest for a medical relief has been prioritized by Shelley. She has given precedence to scientific verities, to the fact that we need to give importance to scientific verities as much as we can. So when a Spanish flu hits the Commonwealth, and by the Commonwealth I refer to a small mill town in the Pacific Northwest in this novel, there is this, this weird idea that Mary Shelley's novel can be a continuation of another novel where the ethical dilemma of the pandemic can be very well pointed out. I'm talking about Thomas Muller's The Last Town on Earth. So whereas on one hand you have the last man, a Fukuyaman idea that way, the last man standing. In this case as well, you have the last town on Earth. So the very fact that this very atrophied fear that we have reached the nadir, the status of the last, this has to wake us up. And if this doesn't wake us up, then I'm sorry to say the human race will never be woken up. So in this novel, as I was just pointing out to you, this wonderful mill town, the Commonwealth, the Pacific Northwest, features a check post sentry, a check post guard, a check guard called Philip Worthy. Note the surname, Worthy. And there is a wary refuge-seeking soldier, a refugee of sorts. Now the soldier has come back and he is seeking refuge, okay? But he is standing at the checkpost. Should he or should he not let him in? This is the ethical dilemma. Don't you find a parallel, with this to the very idea of the migrant crisis that we have witnessed over the last few months? Should we allow them home? If we don't allow them home, what to happen to them? Should we not take initiative to let them come home safely, to give them a safe passage? Should we not take governmental initiatives for a safe quarantine? Self-isolation is not enough. A safe quarantine is important. A quarantine which has been provisioned with necessary provisions is the proper quarantine that we talk about. How many of the entire population has received that? Very few. So this debate that is part of the new normal is not a new debate. The term the new normal, and consequently, we immediately have academia picking up these terms: the new normal novel, post 9/11 novel, this novel, that novel, the Jewish novel, the Bangladeshi novel, the Mohalla novel, the Mufassil novel. We love to give, brands to works, but at the same time, let us understand that these works that I'm talking about, these works were not given enough importance because we believed these to be fictional. We never believed that this would one day turn into an apocalyptic truth. So, yes, it is true that there are many ideas of futurism that have not proved true. Umberto Eco, for instance, pointed out that the cell phone would die out. It didn't. It is still being, improvised on a daily basis. But at the same time, H.G. Wells pointed out that one day, stairs would be moving, and people laughed at him. Today we have elevators. So flying cars would also be a possibility in the distant future. My idea of pointing out this to you is to understand that medical humanities has to take into account this futurism and predicate the idea of the new normal novel and understand the importance of it being tangible, a materially tangible threat, a materially tangible basis with which we have to understand our immediate future. Evangelical preachers and environmental campaigners are bound to disagree with each other. Victim blaming has continued. Catastrophe and catastrophic ideas of the future will be shunned. The pandemic is being seen as divine punishment on the human race. This is also a very traditional concept that has taken place, that we have traditionally seen sick people as getting punished by God for their sins, So you are a cancer patient, which means that cancer has occurred to you because of sins of the past. I don't understand what sin a newborn baby with cancer could have committed. So we have to understand that perhaps we have to negotiate. In conclusion, I'd like to tell you this, that we have to negotiate our theological understanding of the universe, our political understanding of our veritable reality, and our socio-cultural understanding of each other as something to do with an embroiled continuum into the future. Okay, the situation is quite like that of Edgar Allan Poe's cholera-infested short story. It's a short story, but I'm still mentioning it for your understanding. The Mask of the Red Death. This was written in 1842, in which a prince and his court, they quarantine themselves to escape an epidemic. But the lethal disease, it slips in as an uninvited guest at the masked ball. We all have to live with the new normal, and so must the genre of the new normal novel. Let us welcome that with a newer understanding for our own good and for the greater good of non-humans of this world. With this, I conclude my lecture. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Subhadeep Paul. Thank you for your comprehensive and informative talk. In fact, it was a pleasure listening to you. I could
Thank
have
you so
listened
much.
to you for another couple of hours, maybe. Um,
Thank you.
it was like you spoke about the dynamics of the publishing industry, the sell of book figures, which is very important, the sell figures of the books, and you also talked about the academic syllabus, which possibly need to be reframed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, I would thank you for proposing this new genre, the new normal novel, and because you also talked of the various experiments that it might include. Thank you also for giving us a list of pandemic novels and almost in a bird's eye view, telling us about each and every one of them. I was wondering, Dr. Paul, that will this new normal novel, will it have the potential to become a classic in future? And to use a very hierarchically loaded word, will it become canonized in future? Or will it just have, a localized and a very time-bound appeal? Possibly you would answer to this
Yeah.
in the question answer session. Now Shamim, do we take questions now? Right? Can we take
Uh,
questions?
yes, ma'am, we can. We can.
Okay.
If
Okay.
there
As
are
far as
any.
I can see, um, there's a question from Dr. Prakash Chandra Panda, who's asking, in the era of the present pandemic, when our primary priorities are shifted, it's no more chasing after good literature, rather, it's fighting for survival. How do you take this perspective?
Yes. Thank you, Mitali Di. Before I answer to Dr. Panda's question, let me very briefly try to attempt to respond to your very wonderful observation. I indeed feel that the future, if at all we get to live to see it, I am hopeful, because history has always shown us that diseases have died a natural death, and cures have been found, so everything has a shelf life, and hopefully we will emerge victorious with this disease as well. It's a disease to contend with. But at the same time, let me also point out to the fact that disease in general, and especially viral diseases in particular, are not going to die out very soon. And we have seen with SARS, we have seen with Ebola, we have seen with MERS, we have seen with Zika, that viruses keep coming and going. There is this regular outbreak syndrome that takes place. So obviously, the new normal novel is not going to get dated completely, nor is it going to get shelved. It's not going to get outdated that way. But I'm sure that the scope for the new normal novel would expand in the near future into newer domains and be more accommodative of other, concerns as well. Now, what happens to the particular, COVID-19 pandemic literature or COVID-19 based literary works that would be coming out? We don't have too many as yet, but I'm sure that publishers would now be welcoming narratives that are based on COVID-19 or maybe allied, themes. What would happen to that is for future to debate. It's still too early to understand how we are going to have a resolution, a denouement to this crisis, medical crisis that we are having at this moment. And your observation has a tangible link to the question that Dr. Panda has raised, which is this, that it is very much true that now our priority is with mere survival. Our priority is to remain healthy, and non-infected, and at the same time to not only to ward off this disease, to ward off death in general, which in general we try to do all our in all our days, that we are trying to ward off death on a daily basis. But at the same time, let me point out to you this very fact that I do not want to embark on a binarization between the tangible reality as more pressing and the fictive reality as something that we can dispense with. In fact, I would like these two realities to go hand in hand together. This is the purpose of fiction. This is the purpose of novels, to offer us an understanding of our own context. Okay, some of the novels that I pointed out to you, they do this very wonderful. They in fact make coinages that actually translate into reality. And some of the novels have been fanciful, that yes, we turn into zombies overnight, and this and that happens, and we turn into skeletal bodies which are living. But then let us take that in an anecdotal sense. Let us take that in an allegorical sense. Okay, when The War of the Worlds was written by H.G. Wells, and if you have watched the movie version of the novel as well, then there are these aliens who don't have bodies. They have minds. They have brains which are very powerful, but they feed on humans. They feed on human blood. So the Dracula image, the idea of parasitism, this is sociological. This is not really merely literary metaphorical in that sense of the term. So Dr. Panda, we have to understand that it's not we who would be chasing literature. It's actually literature that would be chasing us, and facts which will be chasing us, fiction which will be chasing us. We will be breathless in trying to keep pace with the chase. But we must try. We must still try, and we must try to make a proper holistic understanding of the same. So this is my take on your observation that yes, survival is the most important concern, but precarity on all its levels, the many different ways in which we are precarious at this point of time, is something that fiction is gearing us up for. Art in general is gearing us up for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. I think there is, this is not a question exactly, but a kind of an observation from Priom Francis. It says, thank you for the comprehensive treatment of the topic. So the pandemic will make people less averse to dystopian and apocalyptic fiction as spiced up doomsday works, since it might have lowered the perceived fictive quality associated with such genres.
Yes. Yes, I would definitely agree with what Priyam is trying to say. And along with that, this is also true that fiction would actually relate us, novels, there are a lot of novels that would relate us to the understanding of the fact that utopia and dystopia, traditionally understood, are two opposite ends of the spectrum. So either we tend to get too hopeful with utopian narratives, or we tend to get too atrophied with dystopian narratives. The fact of the matter is we are living with utopian and dystopian realities at the same time. Okay, and this is what the new normal novel is trying to tell us. Let me give you an example that I have missed. It's a novel called Cinder. Okay, it's taken from the Cinderella story. If you remember, all of us do remember the Cinderella story, where the magic slippers and the torturous aunt and the clock turning midnight and she losing the fanciful status and all that. I'm not going into that. But in this case, it's not Cinderella. This novel features a protagonist who is a cyborg, and her name is Cinder. Okay, the Rella has been erased. So cinder, as you know, is volatile. It is combustible, and cinder is blamed. Okay, cinder is blamed for the lacuna of one of the stepsisters who has caught the disease. Okay, who has received infection. With this, we come to the understanding of the fact that there is a stigmata which is always associated with the diseased person. Okay, and this is the reason why the average person does not want to come up with his or her diseases. Okay, they tend to shun it at their private levels. But then you have responsible celebrities and others who come up and make it the new normal also, that it is more responsible to be open about your disease and to talk about it in person. So nothing is stigmatic or stigmatized anymore. But in this case, the stigma is passed on to cinder. The blame is shifted to cinder so that she can be put as the agent responsible for causing trouble to the rest of the family. Okay, the very attitude of blame shifting that you have, that's a cyborg and that's the problem that we have. We need to keep that away from our human precepts. And Cinder realizes that she has to attend the magic ball, but she also realizes whether or not she will attend the magic ball, whether or not it is only about her Prince Charming coming true in her life, whether that is the only thing that she has been hoping for in her life. On the contrary, she realizes that no, that is not the only thing that she has been hoping for or she should hope for. The prime thing that she should hope for is that now she is an agent for saving her city and correspondingly the world. So mind you, we have as our new age savior a messiah, a very ordinary, suprahuman that way, or a post-human that way. The cyborg is not exactly post-human, but anticipating the post-human. But we have an extra-human, a cyborg, telling us more about our humanity than we as humans could ever grapple with. This is the, I think, ethical, the philosophical, the ethico-philosophical standpoint that we have to really negotiate with. And if we can do that, then I am sure, as Amitav Ghosh had pointed out in both his fictional and non-fictional writing, or many other writers have also done the same, is that fiction, non-fiction, fact, tangible fact, futuristic fact, they would all be aligned on the same plane. And we would be making better sense of our lives, not just for ourselves on an individual basis, but for all of us on a collective basis. So thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Am I right, Shamim?
Yes, ma'am. There's no more question.
Yes. So
Thank you,
then
ma'am.
over to you. Yes. Thank you so much, Shubhadeep. It was actually a really, really learning experience for me listening to you. I
Thank you.
got to
I need to thank you as well for giving me this patience since I couldn't join the last time and you took out time for me for this special lecture. So I really need to thank you a lot, Mitaludi. Thank you so much.
So over to Shamim. Sure, Shamim can end the lecture, right?
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, once again. And thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Subhadeep Paul, for your very erudite and very enlightening speech. I must say that your speech was excellently relevant to the topic of the webinar. And frankly speaking, sir, as an organizer and as a convener of this webinar, I was, and we were actually, we the organizers, were looking forward to a paper or a speech like this, basically. Thank you very much for focusing on how the novel would or might fit into the new normality of the new normal, new era, contrasted to the pre-pandemic old era. You have hit a number of areas that provokes us basically to rethink and to reread and recontextualize the literary text in the post-pandemic era, or probably, or in this present era. Sir, if you don't mind, can I ask one or two questions?
Definitely. Please go ahead. Please go
Thank you,
ahead.
sir. So my first, this is more than a question, this is a clarification, basically. So how would you actually see in this new normalcy or new normality of the new normal in novels in light of neoliberalism? Why I'm asking this question? Because recently few economists, actually, I don't remember the names properly, but they have already a kind of declaration. They have made a kind of declaration that this is the pandemic era is going to be the end of the neoliberalism, and we are entering into the post neoliberal era. That means the neoliberalism is ending. So how would you actually focus your speech in the light of this statement that neoliberalism is going to die? And I hope you can understand the question.
Yeah. That's a very wonderful observation, because this is why I mentioned that this talk in particular is very interdisciplinary, in the sense that now you have brought in economics as well. Very, very true. The way I see it is this, that yes, I'm aware of the fact that these critical references were made quite recently. But the way I see it is this, that traditionally it is too daunting. Traditionally, it is too much of a validated assertion to say that any particular ism or any particular school or clique of philosophy is going to die out just like that, because neoliberalism has been the very fount of the Western empire, the very basis of the West. Okay, and since I mentioned the post-90s American empire, which has been basically predicated on a neoliberalist expansion. Now, you see, liberalism in that sense is definitely a welcome idea, but liberalism not in the sense of state liberalism only. Neoliberalism has to be accommodative of the individual and the collective emancipation of the masses as well. That is when neoliberalism becomes a veritable success. But since I mentioned in the very recent past that what has actually happened is this, that the very idea, the political ideology of neoliberalism has been hijacked by right-wing politicians all over the world. And they have used neoliberalism as a tool to enhance plutocratic ideas, to favor corporate business specialization, and definitely to promote an interrelationship between exploitative capitalist tendencies and state collusion with the same. So the state has just become an agency to partner with different business houses who are fortunate that their businesses have been protected by the state. Don't ask me to give you examples. I do not want to be politically overt. Let me remain politically covert. But across the world, this is not only to say that I'm referring to one or two countries only. Across the world, we have seen an inundation of traditional natural resources and natural reservations for continuity, whether they may be the Amazon jungles or whether they may be, a project, a dam project, which can have disastrous ecological consequences. These have been just thrown out of the window because they have been seen as anti-progress. You have seen Donald Trump telling very recently that you can't expect the country to progress if you sit on natural reserves. You're sitting on natural reserves. You're not letting them be exploited. So you can't have progress. when you examine this type of an observation, you would realize that oftentimes we have to calculate our extractions, our fossil fuel extractions, for example, based on the fact that how much profit it would make in the short term and how much of damage it would actually make in the long term. Why are we so hell-bent on doing away with the forest reserves of Uttarakhand or Uttaranchal? Why are so we hell-bent on destroying the Amazons? The reason is it really that the whole population of Brazil is going to be super rich by exploitation of these resources? No. Who are the people? Who are the businessmen who are actually getting the tenders? They're Chinese businessmen who are getting the tenders. So you must understand the hollowness of these assertions. And I am sure people are understanding these assertions, but at the same time, let me lamentably regret the fact that a majority of the population do not understand the implications of this postulation. A majority of the people are happy if they get a job, if they get some bit of employment, if they get some bit of assurance that some good is going to come to them on an immediate platform. They're not really bothered about these long-term issues. But the post-90s era, the neo-globalized era, the neo-liberalized era as well, if you might note it, has also been an era of people's movements, mass movements. So there are checks and balances. Nothing is going to die out. Nothing new is going to come in, save on a terminological basis they are going to come in maybe, but there is going to be a heightened contestation. And how as a species, the human race, the Anthropocene, is going to cope with this, is going to grapple with this, is for time to see. And I am sure that there will be a lot of inter-fighting and intra-fighting. And I am sure out of this, I have mentioned in my previous lectures that a new, more advanced species would be coming in. They have already come in a minor way. They would be coming in a major way, which is the reason why I have now entered my scholarship in the domain of posthumanism. Francisca being a very lead figure in this regard. The post-human turn would leave us to an understanding as to how probably a balanced exploitation of natural resources would be taking place, or alternatives would be taking place. I'll give you a very brief example, since I've said so many things already, that very recently I read an article which says that if you could employ 1/3 of the Sahara Desert for solar panels, you could provide electricity to 2 or 3 continents for a year. Okay, why are we still not doing that? We are not doing that for oil. There is oil. There is the oil war that is still having to go on in a very intrepid manner, and there are other allied issues to war as well. So this is a very broad-based question. This is a very broad-based idea that would require a lot of discussion, which maybe I would be discussing in some other lecture in the near future. But I hope you get the gist of my statement. The very fact that, yes, neoliberalism is going to take a new shape, perhaps. The hypocritical governmental forms are going to be done away with. But what kind of responsible government we will have all over the world, or governments will have all over the world, is for time to see. So that's it, Samin.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I do have another question.
Basically. Yeah, please. You're welcome.
This is with regard to actually my recent study of an article. I was reading in that article that perhaps Renaissance could not have been possible had there not been the bubonic plague of the mid 14th century. And the article also claimed that perhaps the rise of English as language and literature in English could not have been possible if this pandemic was also not there in the mid 14th century. So, as we saw at that time, that there was kind of a Ottoman invasion that triggered the dispersion of intellectuals from the Byzantine hub of literary practices and intellectual practices as well. And they dispersed to different lands of Europe. And so the Renaissance, in fact, came into being. And so the development of English literature subsequently. So my question is basically, though you have partly touched this answer, actually, this question, in your last answer to my last question, what future or what prospective future is awaiting us? What is the trend, the paradigmatic changes that are actually waiting for us in light of the previous
Okay.
example?
Yeah. Well, that would require me to step outside the immediate domain of the new normal novel. But since this is a very holistic general question in this regard, let me also answer it generally. The idea is this: that yes, you are true that the Renaissance, the English Renaissance or the European Renaissance, that has been the product of a lot of forces. You see, it's not just one or two forces, but that has been an assemblage of a lot of forces that have taken place. And of course, the critical, interactions of different empires, so to say, the Ottoman Empire and the Western empires, and the opening up of newer sea routes, the Byzantine Empire, proliferating at the same time. But at the same time, have we really understood the fact that when we study the flowering of the Renaissance, or when we study the Renaissance in its positivist aspect, do we also acknowledge the fact that the Renaissance has also given us a lot of clues about epidemics, pandemics, and how they have wreaked havoc on the human population? For instance, if you go to Venice, or if you go to Italy, I would not suggest you go there right now. Italy is in a ramshackle condition, but still, in general, even if you look at the internet, you would see that that was a period when sculpture was taking place in a major way. And still, when people, for obvious tourism reasons, they visit these places, they find these frescoes and these carvings, and they marvel enormously at the beauty and the almost neo-Herculean splendor of these carvings. But at the same time, how many of us register that there are frescoes and carvings of diseases and people suffering, and the dead being carted away? Even with Egyptian painting, for instance, you have a lot of reference to the medical exigencies that humanity has to face at large. We don't, and we tend to gloss over them with an attitude that is an interstitial thing, that is a brief thing, that is more of an immediate thing, and which is going to tide away very soon. That is not something that has a long-term agenda. That is the error that we make. It's definitely right to go back to the past and study history in connection with the present. That's the right way to do historicity and history in general. But at the same time, let us remember that we are now in a more technocratic, empowered situation than we have ever been before. Okay, and based on that, the position that we have come to now, if we do not accelerate this techno-humanistic imperative for an exclusive betterment of mankind, then this is going to be catastrophic. This is really going to be a catastrophic state of realism, and the repercussions of which is going to be enormously a binding force on the human race. And the Renaissance, if you go by different theories, like for instance, one of the theory is Yeats's spiral theory. The Jair theory is another theory where the Renaissance is a phenomenon that takes place, after a certain point of time in different milieus. You see, it's a continuum actually. You have high points and low points of culture. So I'm sure we would see a Renaissance in the near future as well, if things go right. But if things go completely all right, I don't know how you can connect the past Renaissance, I'm using it in the plural sense, with a future imperative. Yes, the learning lessons have to be proper for us. That is my take on your observation. Shamim.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful answer, actually. So I hope there will be a new Renaissance, probably.
Yeah, we are welcoming that. We are waiting for that, hopefully.
Yes. With permission from Dr. Mitali Gangopadhyay, shall we end, ma'am? Shall we end the session?
Yes, please,
Okay.
please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will take just 1 minute more. This is a very formal part of this webinar. I thank Professor Bapin Mullik, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar College, Betai, Nodia. I thank Dr. Mitali Gangopadhyay for chairing the session and for being with us with so much patience. Thank you, ma'am. I thank Professor Sudipto Roy, Assistant Professor and HOD, Department of English, Amdanga Jugal Mahavidyalaya, for being so wonderful a colleague and being there always with me in every endeavor and enterprise. I thank Dr. Onadi Mohan Roy, Principal, Amdanga Jugal Mahavidyalaya, for being there like a father figure in enthusing me in every go. Finally, I thank the wonderful participants for your spirit of intellectual inquiry and for being there with us. So here I call it a day. Thank you all. Thank you very much. I once
Thank you.
again thank
Thank you.
Dr. Subhadeep Paul. Thank you.
Thank you so
all.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ravinder, hello, hello, hello.